Behind the scenes, SQL Server Data Tools uses what Microsoft calls its Power Buffer technology in order to manage the update process. Power Buffer stores all the edits you make in either a T-SQL query editor or table designer window so that Data Tools can provide a number of services. Any errors in the table designer or with T-SQL code you write immediately appear in Visual Studio's error list window, just like what happens when you have syntactical errors in C# or VB code and compile a project. When you're ready to publish changes to the database, Data Tools generates an alter script for all changes across all active Power Buffer windows, alerts you to any issues, and lets you apply all changes as a single script, notifying you of any problems along the way. And Data Tools keeps track of changes made to database objects by other tools, such as Applications and Management Studio. These changes immediately appear in SQL Server Object Explorer without making you refresh its contents in most cases. And you can compare schemas in Visual Studio with those in the existing database. The result is that the process of deploying your changes to the database is highly automated, with instant feedback about any problems that arise. Now I'm going to publish my changes to the Kennel database, which is going to create the dogs table as I have it defined here. All right, so notice up here in the upper left-hand corner of the table designer, there's this update button. I'll go ahead and click that, and that opens up this preview database updates. This gives you a preview of all of the actions that the update scripts are going to make. So you can see what changes and make sure that everything's included and so forth. At this point, you have three choices. First, of course, you can click on the cancel button and forget the whole thing. In that case, you don't make any changes to the database. Second, you could click the Generate Script button here. And in that case, Data Tools generates the update script and displays it in a T-SQL query editor window so that you can review it and possibly make changes to it, and then execute it manually. And then the third option is to select the Update Database so that Data Tools generates the script and executes it immediately. All right, so in this case, I'm going to click on Generate Script. We'll go through. Notice that we have this Data Tool Operations window, or Data Tools Operations window, that lists the steps and indicates whether it executed successfully. And in this case, all it was doing was going through, checking the code within the designer, and then generating this update script. Now, what's a little bit surprising here is that this script is way more complex than just a simple create table statement. If you scroll through it, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Data Tools needs to handle a variety of update scenarios, so it generates code to support as many as possible, as well as to handle errors that occur. So you can spend some time going through this as you make more complex changes to database objects. The script is going to get more complex and more of these additional features are going to come into play. But at this point, I just want to take a look at the actual create table statement here. So this is the meat of what's going to happen here, assuming all of the error conditions are checked and so forth. And as you can see, it's just a slightly more fleshed out version of the code that was within the T-SQL pane within the table designer. Now, one thing about the generation of the update script, it's a one-way operation. This is script code, it's opened up in an editor, and you can make changes to it. But if you make changes and it affects the updates that are made, such as to rename columns in the new table or change their data types, the changes are not going to be reflected in the table designer. If you want them there, you'll also need to make the changes in the designer. So just a word of caution on that. It's very common that you'll want to change the script, but it's not this two-way operation. All right, so now I could execute the update script by clicking on this Execute button. Or you can right-click on the editor itself and select Execute. But instead, I want to have data tools do all the work. So I'm going to close this window with the update script and go back over here to the table designer. I'll once again click on update. It comes up with the same user actions. But this time, I want to click the Update Database button here. Now, Data Tools Operation window again opens, and it gives me the list of steps that it's performing as it generates the database script. So you can see that that step is still there. And then it also executed the update script on database kennel. So this is the difference between just generating that script. If there were any problems, I could click here in View Results, and it would show me any problems that occurred and open up the error list and so forth. In this case, it just opens up that deployment script again because I didn't have any problems. Okay, notice too that the new operations appear here at the head of the list, but this is that last update that I made that just generated the script. It's still there, and so over the course of a data tool session, you have a nice little history of all the actions that you performed. As soon as you close Visual Studio, it goes away, but you have that record for the moment. Now, you can also look at the output window here in order to see a list of the changes actually made to the database. Scroll up to the top here so you can see that we're updating kennel, created dogs, created that constraint, and so forth. Now, this is sort of an interesting one. Rename refactoring operation with key is skipped. Element dogs ID, SQL simple column, will not be renamed to dog ID. Now, that may seem a little bit distressing, but what that's referring to is an internal change within the table designer. And the column is, in fact, named dog ID in the resulting table. So let's verify that our changes were made. Go back over here to SQL Server Object Explorer, go into Kennel, expand the Tables node, and see that we now have a dogs table. And I can drill down further, look at columns, and we do in fact have a dog ID, which is a primary key value. Great, so now our database in that instance of SQL Server that I'm connected to here has that dogs table. Made changes to that live database. So now that the dogs table exists, you can also add data to it using either T-SQL insert statements in a query editor or visually using a data editor. I'm going to use the data editor here, which you can get to by right-clicking the table name and select View Data. Now, this is a new table, so there's no data to view, but it gives this nice grid that's editable, and you can insert any data. But if there were existing records, the first 1,000 rows would display, and you can change that value to 200, 1,000, or all. Just be careful of that. If this is a 100 million row table in the production server, you probably don't want to pull down all of those rows. Okay, 1,000 is great for our purposes here. All right, so first thing I can do is select the dog ID, and I can attempt to change that. So I'm typing a 1, and nothing happens. The data editor is smart enough to know that that's a primary key with an identity value, so it doesn't let me update that value. It's going to generate those values automatically. So this is one way that the data editor doesn't let me enter any invalid values. So I'll hit Tab, and now I can enter a dog's name. First dog I'll enter is Jewel. And I'll put her birth date as 5/1/2100. Notice that I get red exclamation marks. Just indicates that the data has been changed here within the editor, but has not changed within the database. And so that's what the little tooltip says. Data in the cell has changed. Change has not been committed to the database yet. Okay. So at this point, that's fine. All right, and I'll put in a note about Jewel. She's a retired sled dog with torn ACLs in her back legs, unfortunately. Okay, and I'll hit Tab, and I get this box indicating a problem. No row is updated. Normally, if there's no problems, that would have saved that row in the table in the database. So the dialog box says the data in row 1 was not committed. Error source, error message, the insert statement conflicted with the check constraint, that I created. The conflict occurs in database kennel, table, dogs, column, birth date. Statement has been terminated. Correct the errors and retry, or if I just want to forget about adding that row, I can just close this dialog box, hit escape, and all those data values will go away. All right, so this is a good thing. I put in a date that is far in the future, but the check constraint required that the birth date has to be before today's date. So SQL Server is doing its job. So I'll go back over here to this birth date field and do that as 2000. Hit Tab again, and now we have a record in the database. Okay, I'm going to add a few more dogs real quickly here because we need a little bit of data to work with within the table. Next I'll put in Izzy. Don't know what her birth date is, and she's a Karelian bear dog. And actually a mix with a husky. And I can widen this a little bit so you can see the full text there. Next I'll put in Marty. Her birth date was 6/30/1997. She's an Irish setter, decidedly not a sled dog. She never really forgave me for bringing her to live with sled dogs. Okay, Bonsai, one of our newest dogs, a little puppy, very buoyant kind of guy. Have no idea what his birth date was. But he had a vascular ring, which is essentially a birth defect. And surgery corrected that. And he's doing extremely well. And there's Jem. No idea when Jem was born. Got her through the Second Chance League. That's a volunteer organization that I'm volunteer president of here in Fairbanks that rescues sled dogs. And we got her when her fosters moved to Arizona. Arizona, great place, but not a real good environment for sled dogs. And then the last one I'll enter is Pixel. No idea when her birth date was, and she was formerly called Sassy. Came into the shelter with her sister Sissy and Sassy. Okay, so there we have some data within the database. So at this point, this is existing data within the table. Each time I moved off the row, it was saved to the underlying table. And the editor also allows changes to existing data. Okay, so I can come in here. Maybe we found out that Bonsai's birth date was 5/6 in, let's say 2010. That's probably not right, but I can make changes to that, hit the down arrow, and now that value is changed within the table. Usual data editing stuff, nothing magical here. Okay, so now the environment here of the editor has various toolbar buttons here. So the first one is Stop. You can use this if you refresh the contents of the editor for a table with many rows. It might take a long time to process and get all of those rows. So you can click this button, which is enabled during a long-running operation in order to stop the process. Then there's a refresh button that refreshes the contents of the data editor with data stored in the table on the server. So I can go ahead and do that. And you notice there we have a refresh of the data. You can create a new row here, which essentially just takes you to that last row. A little bit less than useful here, but if you're displaying 1,000 rows or more, this can very quickly get you to that empty row at the end of the table. And then I talked about max rows. Next item is script. This lets you generate T-SQL code in a new query editor window in order to generate the data in the table. So if I go ahead and click that, there's all of those insert statements. And notice that it helpfully sets identity insert on so that I can include those identity values. Now, I wouldn't be able to execute this code against the existing dogs table because that would cause errors because those identity values are already there. It's a primary key, so it has to be unique. But I could change the connection to another instance of SQL Server or change the name of the table to another existing table, and then I could execute this code and insert all of that data. All right, then back over to the data editor, and the last one here is Scriptify. It generates the same script that I just showed you with all those insert statements, but it prompts you for a .sql file and a location in order to save the script to a file instead of opening it in the query editor window.